Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 14th, 2024. Well, we're going to take a look at the effect of a weekend in which there were threats thrown around by various nations and individuals, continued fighting, death, bombings, unleashing of chaos in two war zones, Ukraine and Southwest Asia. But while we're looking at this, we should step back for a moment and look at something that we should celebrate. And I'm talking about the meeting that's going to take place next week in Kazan, Russia, of the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa organization, which now has 4 additional members, maybe 5 additional members if the Saudis finalize their application, but also another 30 to 40 countries trying to join. Now, most people have no idea what the BRICS represent. They may have heard of it. They may have heard of the de-dollarization. But I want you to hear from a person on the inside who is the former vice president of the New Development Bank, which is the credit agency, the bank of the BRICS, a man named Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr. And he was speaking following some meetings in the last weeks of representatives of the various nations that are part of the BRICS. And here's what he said. The current international monetary and financial system, controlled by the West, is actually unreformable. That is, you can't reform it. You can't make it work. Therefore, he said, quote, we need to construct an alternative international payment system immune to extraterritorial sanctions from the United States and others. We need to build a new unit of account, which could be a basket of currencies of the BRICS or a subset of the BRICS. We need to use this perhaps as a transitional device to construct a new reserve currency, which would be an alternative to the US dollar and the euro. And that's the discussion of de-dollarization. That the problem that we're facing right now is that much of the world no longer trusts the West for good reason. We've seen the weaponization of the dollar through the International Monetary Fund conditionalities, through sanctions, through the fact that if you have a payment system dependent on dollars, nations have to go to the banks, particularly the British banks, to get dollars, where they have to pay extra for the ability to have dollars to settle accounts. Now, this has added to the consolidation of power of the central banks, which is at the heart of the idea of the Great Reset. Now, in order to avoid this weaponization and to avoid the power of the private central banks, because central banks are not controlled by governments, they're controlled by the private banks. In order to overcome that, you need to develop a new system, an economic development system, to replace a monetary system. Now, what's the problem with a monetary system? Well, on the one side, you have radical monetarism, that is financialization. The idea that you make money by betting on financial instruments, buying and selling, going short, and so on. Does that add anything real to the economy? No. In fact, it subtracts. It increases the overall debt. It decreases the ability of nations to have credit to invest in areas of real physical economy. Furthermore, you have the advance of the move to get rid of sovereign nation states, because in case nations object to the weaponization policies, the fact that they can't get credit, the fact that their goods are essentially stolen through looting, that means that there's no sovereignty. So nations are looking to restore sovereign rights. But it also is a technocracy. The current system is trying to replace representative governments because they say that if constituents have influence on the people who make the laws, then it takes power out of the hands of the bankers and puts it into the population. And they don't want that. They don't want an American system-style government outside of or anywhere in the world. Now, at the same time, if you listen to what Batista was saying, you have the potential to put an end to the empire of dollars and the empire of the Anglo-Americans, and put an end to the idea of might makes right. And what is that? It's the rules-based order. We make the rules, you must obey. If you don't obey, you'll be sanctioned. You maybe have a regime change coup. Maybe you have an assassination. That's what the empire has done, and that's why there's a rebellion against it. So looking at this potential, ask yourself, what's wrong with governments in the Anglo-American sphere? Why are they pursuing these wars with no intent to end them? Why no negotiations? Why no diplomacy? Why the looting through tax dollars of populations to pay for weapons, to essentially funnel money into the endless pit of the military-industrial financial complex, away from areas where there's a need for investment today? And the reason for that is it's controlled by special interests. These special interests include corporate cartels, the so-called too-big-to-fail banks that are protected by governments with your taxpayers' dollars. But where does the profit for these banks go? It goes to the shareholders. The corporate cartels in pharma, in agriculture, in virtually every area of the economy. Corporate cartels are dictating policies to governments. That's what we mean by technocracy. You have no say through your representatives. And so as a result, there's no justice, there's no fairness, and there's no diplomacy. You either accept this or you will be crushed. Now, ultimately, while I said this is the fault of the political leadership that are corrupt and greedy and bought off, it's our failure to insist on our rights. We the people, does that mean anything? It doesn't if you sit back and say there's little that can be done. But the two immediate problems that are part of this situation is there's very little empathy. You don't look at the children of Palestine as though they're your children and say, how can we let this happen? You don't look at hungry children in Sudan and say, how did we let this happen? You don't look at the war zones. You don't look at the areas where credit has been cut, where people are dying of preventable disease, from lack of water, from lack of power. And you don't say, how did we let this happen? How did we become so desensitized to human suffering? And add to that the fact that there's very little hope. The idea that you can change it, well, forget it, they're too powerful. And as a result, censorship works. They keep the truth from you. They promote acceptable narratives. And so you find yourself saying things that you know are false to be accepted, to fit in. And so governments continue to be controlled by corrupt special interests and greedy oligarchs with no morality. And while you see this happening, you've resigned yourself that there's nothing that can be done. Well, there is something that can be done. They have to be called out. And I'm appending to this description section links to two videos where you'll see what can be done. The first one is a statement from Scott Ritter, the well-known former UN weapons inspector, speaking at the Schiller Institute's International Peace Coalition meeting last Friday, where he again makes the comment, you should be afraid. We do face the danger of nuclear war. And I urge you to watch Scott and think what he's saying. And then secondly, Jose Vega, a courageous young man who's known for his interventions against AOC, Hillary Clinton, and others, this time intervening against the New York Times hotshot Paul Krugman. And you see, Krugman has no idea what Jose is saying, but people in the audience do, and you will. He's basically saying, You economists are liars. You work for the system. You're gaslighting us. So look at these two videos and think about them. And then ask yourself, am I going to be one of those people who turns his back to the suffering of humanity? Or will I do something like what Scott Ritter's doing, like what Jose Vega's doing, what Helga LaRouche is doing? Will I get involved and do something for the future? And if not, what can I tell my children or grandchildren when they look at the fascist state that's crumbling around them and they ask, what did you do, Mama or Papa, as this was going on? We cannot allow that kind of tragedy to unfold. So take advantage of these videos, watch them, study them, share them, and participate with us to speak out against the powerful and make them accountable.